equals she always stayed in the background. No one noticed her much, and she did not mind. In school, in the small town where she lived, people usually focused on the loudest voices or the ones who could make everyone laugh. She did not compete with them. She preferred quiet corners where she could sit with a notebook, a sketch, or her small piano at home. Music had been her companion for years, her private world where nobody could judge her. She had discovered it by accident, a simple old keyboard her parents bought when she was 8. At first it was just fun, pressing the keys, watching the lights blink. But slowly, she began to understand the sound, how it could tell a story, even without words. Every night, she would practice in secret. Her fingers would slide over the keys, learning scales, chords, and songs she loved from old recordings she found online. She would play until her hands ached and her eyes were heavy with sleep. But she never stopped. Her classmates never knew about these late-night sessions. To them, she was just quiet and shy, the kind of person who seemed invisible. Sometimes she would raise her hand to answer a question. A few would laugh at her mistakes or quietly whisper to each other. She had learned to ignore them. She knew they didn't understand her world. While others played games outside or talked loudly in the hallways, she imagined herself performing on big stages, in front of crowds that would actually listen. She dreamed about making them feel something with music, just as she felt every night alone in her room. The school announcement about the upcoming talent show came like a ripple across the student body. The loud and popular kids immediately began planning acts, rehearsing with friends, and teasing each other about who would win. The teachers encouraged everyone to participate, hoping to see students show confidence and creativity. But for her, it was terrifying. The thought of standing on stage in front of everyone made her stomach twist. She wanted to participate, but also feared the ridicule. The idea of performing alone while everyone watched made her nervous. Her heart would race just thinking about it. Even when she finally told her parents she wanted to enter, they were hesitant. "Are you sure?" her mother asked softly. "You've never done anything like this in front of people." They also knew she needed to try, that music was part of who she was. They helped her set a schedule, practicing a little more each day, helping her select pieces that would show her talent without overwhelming her. She spent hours choosing the right song, one that could express her feelings, her years of secret practice, and her desire to be heard. The days passed quickly. Her classmates, meanwhile, didn't pay much attention to her preparation, assuming she wouldn't actually participate. Some even made small jokes about her being too quiet for a stage. The whispers followed her in hallways and lunchrooms. A few students snickered when they imagined her trying to perform in front of so many people. She heard them sometimes, but she tried to block it out. She focused on the music, on the notes she wanted to play, and the story she wanted to tell. Her determination grew quietly, powered by years of practice and a longing to finally show her world to others. As the day of the talent show came closer, her nerves increased. She practiced in the morning, afternoon, and night, sometimes feeling her hands would never move fast enough. Sometimes she made mistakes that frustrated her so much she wanted to quit. But every time she remembered the nights she had spent alone playing her heart out, she forced herself to continue. The piano became more than an instrument. It became her voice. Every key pressed was a word she could not speak, a thought she could not share, a feeling she could not show otherwise. Music was the one way she could communicate her inner world, and now it would be in front of everyone. On the day of the show, she arrived early. The gymnasium was filled with students, teachers, and parents. Bright lights made her feel small, and the chatter of the audience made her stomach twist. Everyone seemed so confident, so loud, and she felt even smaller than usual. People walked around, practicing, joking, and laughing. When she looked at them, she realized they really did not expect her to do well. She could feel the judgment even before she played. Some students whispered, some laughed quietly, assuming she would freeze or play wrong notes. A few even made small jokes about her. Thinking it was funny, she had dared to enter. She went to the piano backstage, sitting in front of it, and took a deep breath. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, soft and smooth. She closed her eyes and remembered every late night, every song she had learned alone, every small victory when a tricky piece finally sounded right. She thought about the music she loved, the feelings she wanted to share, and the story she wanted to tell. Her nervousness did not vanish, but it turned into something else: determination. She knew this was her moment, and she would not let fear control her. Backstage, she could hear the previous performers. Some played instruments, some sang, and some danced. The applause for each act made her heart pound harder. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her own performance. She had rehearsed this song countless times. Every note, every pause, every touch of the keys had been perfected over weeks of practice. Her fingers were ready, her heart was ready, but her mind struggled with the pressure of being seen. She kept telling herself that the people who laughed before would be the ones listening now, really listening for the first time. Finally, it was her turn. The announcer called her name, and she stood up, walking slowly to the stage. The lights were bright, and the room felt huge. Every eye seemed to be on her. Every whisper seemed louder. She could feel some people smirking, some shaking their heads, assuming she would fail. But she remembered her countless hours of practice, the nights alone with the piano, the tears, and the triumphs. She reminded herself that the music was hers, not theirs. She had the power to tell her story, to make them feel what she felt. If she could just begin. She sat down at the piano, her hands hovering over the keys. For a moment, she froze, letting the silence fill the room. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all eyes and all expectations. The whispers seemed to fade, the laughter seemed distant. She focused on one thing: the first note. That single note would start everything. It was the bridge from her private world to the public one. She pressed it carefully, feeling it vibrate under her fingers, and then continued, letting the music flow, shaping it with every emotion she had built over years of practice. She was no longer the quiet girl in the background. She was a musician, a storyteller, ready to speak without words, ready to leave everyone in awe. When she stepped onto the stage, the lights felt blinding. She could barely see the faces in the crowd, but she knew they were all watching. The room was filled with students, teachers, and parents, all waiting to see what she would do. Some were curious, some were doubtful, and some had already decided she would fail. She felt the weight of every glance, every whisper, every smirk aimed at her. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved toward the piano, but she reminded herself to breathe slowly and focus. She had come this far, practiced for so long, and now it was time to show them what she could do. As she sat down, she noticed some students whispering and laughing. A few leaned back in their chairs with quiet smirks. She could feel their judgment like a heavy blanket pressing down on her shoulders. It would have been easy to let it shake her, to let the fear take over and freeze her fingers. But she had learned to use the pressure as a way to focus. The piano in front of her was her safe space, her companion for years. Every key had felt familiar during countless late-night practices. And she knew that now, more than ever, she had to trust herself. The announcer called her name, and a brief pause filled the room. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would happen next. The silence was almost unbearable, but she welcomed it. The quiet gave her space to think, to prepare her mind, and to recall every note she had memorized. She pressed her fingers lightly on the keys, feeling the texture beneath her fingertips. Her heart pounded, but she felt a small spark of confidence. This was her moment, and no amount of doubt from others could take it away. Around her, the audience whispered to each other. Some whispered words of doubt, some were simply curious to see what she could do. The people who had laughed before now leaned slightly forward, their expressions shifting between amusement and intrigue. She could sense the change even before she played a single note. Something about her quiet presence, her calm, despite the tension, began to demand attention. They had expected weakness or hesitation, and she knew that. But she also knew that her music would speak louder than any words or gestures. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. Memories of her practice sessions flooded back nights spent in her room with only the soft glow of her lamp. Hours of repeating difficult parts, the frustration when her fingers refused to cooperate, and the quiet triumph when a melody finally came together. All of those hours had built her skill, her confidence, and her patience. They had built this moment, and now it was time to release all that effort into a single performance. Opening her eyes, she lifted her hands over the keys. The audience was silent now, waiting for the first sound. Her fingers hovered for a brief second, and then she pressed the first key. The note rang out clear and strong, cutting through the tension in the room. She felt a surge of energy as she continued, each note flowing naturally, each movement precise yet full of emotion. The music she had carried in her private world for years now filled the room, touching everyone who listened. At first, the whispers and laughter faded. The people who had been skeptical stopped talking. Faces that had been turned away now focused intently on her. Every note she played drew more attention, more curiosity, more awe. She could see it in the subtle changes, the widening eyes, the slightly open mouths, the sudden stillness. Her music was working. It was telling the story of all those nights she had spent practicing, all the dedication and love she had poured into it. They could not ignore it. No matter how much they had tried to doubt her, she moved through the piece with growing confidence. Every chord, every pause, every delicate melody spoke of the hours of commitment behind it. She felt herself becoming one with the piano, no longer separate from it, no longer affected by the doubts around her. Her fingers flew over the keys effortlessly, guided by years of practice and a deep understanding of the music. The room, once filled with whispers and laughter, was now completely captivated. Even the teachers and parents who had seen many performances before were watching in quiet amazement. Her nervousness had not disappeared completely, but it had transformed. The fear she had felt moments ago became a driving force, pushing her to express herself fully, to show the audience the depth of her talent. The students who had laughed before now leaned forward, their previous amusement replaced by fascination. They could feel the sincerity, the raw emotion, the story she was telling without words. The music was speaking for her, more clearly and powerfully than she ever could with her voice, as she neared the middle of her performance. She introduced subtle variations and gentle flourishes. She had practiced countless times but had never shared with anyone. These small touches revealed her skill, her understanding of the music, and her personal connection to it. The audience could sense the difference between someone who was just playing notes, someone who was truly communicating through music. She was no longer the quiet girl in the background. They were witnessing a musician sharing her soul. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, noticing the transformation in the crowd. Some students sat straighter, their previous smirks gone. Some whispered to each other in disbelief. The teachers exchanged glances, impressed by her precision and emotional depth. Parents nodded quietly, clearly moved. She felt a rush of pride, but she did not let it distract her. She continued to play, letting the music carry her through the rest of the piece, each note building on the last, creating a story that was unfolding in real time. The final notes approached, and she slowed down, savoring each one, making sure they had the right impact. She wanted the ending to linger in the hearts of the audience, to leave them with a feeling they could not ignore. When she finally pressed the last key, the sound hung in the air for a moment, like a gentle echo, before fading away. The room was completely silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one spoke. The effect of her music was undeniable. The people who had laughed, the ones who had doubted, and the ones who were merely curious were now all silent. Taken by the strength and beauty of her performance, it was in that silence that she realized something powerful. She had faced her fears, stood in front of people who doubted her, and told her story through her music. And they had listened. They had been touched, even if they did not know exactly why. That quiet moment of awe, when the room seemed to hold its breath, was proof that she had succeeded, not because she had sought approval, but because she had stayed true to herself, slowly. The silence gave way to the first round of applause. It started softly, but quickly grew louder as more people recognized the effort and emotion she had poured into her performance. The students who had laughed now clapped sincerely, some even standing. Teachers nodded with admiration, and parents smiled proudly. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from the applause itself, but from knowing that her music had reached them. It had crossed the gap between doubt and understanding, between expectation and surprise. She stood from the piano, taking a small, graceful bow. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but she felt stronger than she had ever felt before. Every step she had taken, every hour she had spent practicing, every moment of doubt and fear had led to this. She had faced the room full of judgment and turned it into a space where her talent and passion could shine. For the first time, she felt fully seen, not just as a quiet girl in the background, but as someone capable of inspiring others, even in a room that had doubted her. After her first notes filled the room, she felt a sudden surge of energy. The tension that had gripped her as she walked on stage seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. She could sense that the audience was fully engaged now, even those who had doubted her. Her fingers moved with confidence, striking each key with precision and feeling. The music flowed naturally, carrying her story forward, revealing years of quiet dedication and passion. Every note was a word, every chord a sentence, telling a story she had never been able to share with anyone before. This moment was more than a performance, it was the culmination of her journey, and she was ready to live it fully as she played. She remembered the nights spent alone, practicing in dim light, learning new pieces from old recordings she had studied over and over. Those nights were long and sometimes lonely, but they had made her resilient. Every mistake she had made, every time her fingers stumbled, had taught her patience. Every time she finally mastered a difficult section, she had felt a small victory that built her confidence. She realized now that those private struggles were what had prepared her for this moment. The audience would not see the hours behind the performance. They would feel the dedication, the emotion, the honesty in every note she played. The room was silent except for the music. Her classmates, who had once whispered and laughed at the idea of her performing, were now leaning forward, captivated. Teachers exchanged quiet, impressed glances, acknowledging the skill and heart behind her performance. Parents, too, seemed moved, many of them leaning forward in their seats, listening with rapt attention. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just her and the piano, and nothing else mattered. Every key she pressed carried her story, and she could see that the audience was beginning to understand it. She played each section with care, allowing the music to breathe, emphasizing the highs and lows. The room seemed to respond to her, as if the air itself listened. She felt a connection, not just with the piano, but with everyone in the room. It was a strange, powerful feeling to reach people she had never met through something so personal and intimate. The initial nervousness she had felt before stepping on stage had melted into focus. She was no longer afraid of judgment. The music had become her voice, stronger than any words she could have spoken. Midway through the piece, she introduced subtle variations she had experimented with during her private practice. These flourishes were not in the original sheet music, but they reflected her personality, her emotions, and her understanding of the music. Each variation added depth and nuance, and she could see the audience responding. Eyes widened, heads tilted, and some leaned closer, drawn in by the unexpected beauty. She realized that the laughter and doubt that had surrounded her earlier had no power here. Music had broken through the wall of skepticism. She felt a quiet triumph. She focused on breathing steadily, keeping her mind present with the music. In those moments, she was entirely absorbed, each note a bridge between her inner world and the audience. She remembered her teacher's words from years ago. Music is not just notes on a page. It is life expressed. Play with heart and people will hear it. Now those words made sense. Every touch of the keys, every pause, every subtle change in tempo conveyed emotion. She was not just performing, she was sharing her life, her effort, and her passion with everyone listening. The room was no longer filled with doubt or whispers. The people who had laughed or looked down on her now had expressions of amazement. Some students whispered to each other, incredulous at the talent they had overlooked. Some teachers nodded slowly, clearly impressed. Parents smiled quietly, sensing the depth of feeling she conveyed. The effect was undeniable. She felt a sense of connection that went beyond simple performance. She was communicating something fundamental, and it was being received, fully and sincerely. As she approached the final section of the piece, She allowed herself to feel the emotion she had carried for years. The music became richer, more expressive, more alive. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note carefully measured, yet flowing naturally. She could feel the story unfolding, each chord a chapter, each melody a sentence. She thought about the nights spent alone, the practice sessions that had seemed endless, and the moments of self-doubt that had threatened to stop her. All of that was transforming into something beautiful, something that the audience could witness and feel. The audience was completely absorbed now. She could hear no whispers, no laughter, no movement. Only the music, only the story, only the emotion she was pouring into the piano. She felt a strange calm, knowing that she was giving everything she had, and that it was being received. For the first time, she understood the power of music to bridge gaps, to reach people, to communicate feelings that words cannot. She realized that all the doubt, all the fear, had been necessary to make this moment even more meaningful. She continued playing, letting the melody rise and fall, giving each note the attention it deserved. She added slight touches of her own, not altering the music drastically, but enhancing it with emotion, with her personality. Every note was deliberate, every pause intentional. She could feel the audience reacting subtly, their focus deepening with each measure. She smiled faintly to herself, knowing that her music was speaking louder than any words could. She had turned nervousness into confidence, doubt into expression, and private effort into public recognition. By the time she reached the penultimate section, her confidence was unshakable. She played with a sense of freedom she had never felt before, as if the music had taken over completely. Her fingers flew across the keys, guided by instinct and emotion, each chord ringing clear and true. She noticed small gestures from the audience, leaning forward, holding their breath, eyes widening in admiration. The initial laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by respect and awe. She felt a deep satisfaction knowing that she had earned it not through words or protest, but through her music. The final notes approached, soft and deliberate, carrying the weight of the entire performance. She slowed slightly, savoring the sound, making each final chord resonate fully. The room held its breath again, caught in the power of the ending. She pressed the last key, letting it linger, allowing the echo to fill the space before fading. For a moment, there was complete silence, as if the room were absorbing everything she had shared. Then, slowly, the sound of applause began, growing steadily, filling the space with recognition and appreciation. She sat back for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. Her hands were still slightly trembling, but her heart was light. She had faced fear, doubt, and judgment, and she had emerged victorious. The music had conveyed her story, her effort, and her passion, leaving the audience moved and attentive. She realized that her performance was not just about impressing others, but about sharing a part of herself that had long remained hidden. In that moment, she felt truly seen, truly heard, and profoundly proud of herself. As the music continued to flow, she noticed the complete change in the audience's energy. The students who had whispered and laughed were now fully attentive. Some were sitting forward, their eyes wide with disbelief, as if they could not comprehend the depth of her talent. Teachers nodded subtly, impressed by her control, precision, and the emotional power she was projecting. Parents smiled quietly, moved by the way the music seemed to carry every feeling she had ever held inside. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. All the doubt, all the whispers, all the laughter had vanished, replaced by attention, respect, and curiosity. The power of her music had transformed the atmosphere, and she could feel it surrounding her, lifting her spirits and steadying her hands. She was completely absorbed in the performance. The piano had become an extension of herself, each note flowing effortlessly, guided by years of practice and dedication. The audience no longer mattered in the sense of judgment. They were part of the experience she was creating. The music had become a conversation, a bridge between her private world and theirs. Every chord, every gentle pause, every sudden flourish communicated more than words ever could. She realized in that moment that she had achieved something remarkable. Not only had she performed, She had shared herself fully, honestly, and powerfully as she reached the middle of the piece. The audience's reaction became even more evident. Heads tilted, eyes widened, and some leaned closer, captivated by the sound. There was no more laughter, no more side whispers, no more smirks. She could sense their fascination, the way they were drawn into her story through the music. Each note she played seemed to pull them deeper, showing them not just skill, but emotion, patience, and passion. She felt a deep connection to them, knowing that they could feel what she had felt, even if only in part. She let herself become completely immersed, letting the music carry her forward. The hours of practice, the struggles, the quiet victories, all of it, had led to this moment. She could feel her fingers moving effortlessly, guided by instinct, memory, and emotion. Every note was deliberate, every chord intentional, every pause full of meaning. She played with a sense of freedom she had never experienced, as if the piano and her emotions were one. The music became a living entity, breathing and moving with her, reaching out to touch the hearts of everyone in the room. The audience was no longer passive. They were part of the experience. Students who had doubted her now whispered to each other in awe, trying to comprehend the talent they had underestimated. Teachers watched silently, recognizing the dedication and passion behind every note. Parents leaned forward, eyes moist with emotion, understanding the beauty of what they were witnessing. She could feel their attention, their respect, their wonder. The room was alive with the music, and she was at the center, guiding everyone through the story she had built over years of private practice. As she approached the later sections, she allowed herself to feel the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. The music grew richer, fuller, more expressive. She added subtle nuances she had practiced alone, touches that revealed her personal connection to the piece. Each variation made the performance more alive, more honest, more her. She felt a surge of confidence, a realization that she had transformed nervousness into power, doubt into expression. Every note carried a piece of her soul, and she could see the effect it was having on the audience. She played with complete focus, aware of every sound, every vibration, every moment of silence. The audience was captivated. They were no longer thinking about who she was or how she looked. They were listening, feeling, understanding. Some students exchanged amazed glances, whispering to each other in disbelief. Teachers nodded quietly, impressed by her mastery and the emotional depth she conveyed. Parents smiled gently, moved by the sincerity and beauty of her performance. She felt a warm, steady confidence, knowing that her music had reached them, touched them, and changed their perception. The music carried her forward, each note telling a story, each chord revealing a part of her journey. She thought about the late nights, the long hours, the mistakes, the frustration, and the quiet victories. All of that was now being transformed into something tangible, something that the audience could experience and understand. She felt proud, not just of her skill, but of her ability to communicate so deeply, so authentically. The room was completely engaged. She could sense that the power of her performance was leaving a lasting impression. As she neared the final passages, she slowed slightly, savoring the sound, allowing each note to resonate fully. She wanted the ending to linger in the minds and hearts of everyone listening. Her fingers moved gracefully, guided by experience and emotion, ensuring that each final chord had impact. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had conveyed everything she had intended. The music had spoken for her, expressing feelings and stories she had kept private for years. She realized that the silence, the nervousness, the doubts, all of it had been necessary to create this moment of truth. The audience was completely absorbed. The students who had doubted her now watched in quiet amazement, some leaning forward, some sitting still with eyes wide. Teachers nodded subtly, clearly impressed by the skill, emotion, and precision of her performance. Parents smiled softly, some with tears in their eyes, sensing the depth and honesty in her music. She felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause or recognition. She had shared herself fully, and it had been received. Her music had broken through barriers, reached people, and communicated something profound. Finally, she played the last chord. The sound lingered in the air, filling the room with a gentle, powerful resonance. For a moment there was complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The effect of her performance was undeniable. The room had been transformed by her music, and everyone present felt it. Then, gradually, the first sounds of applause began. They grew steadily, filling the space with appreciation, admiration, and respect. The students who had laughed before now clapped sincerely, some standing. Teachers smiled, nodding in approval. Parents joined in, their applause heartfelt. She felt a warmth in her chest, not from the recognition, but from knowing that her music had touched everyone present. She stood, bowing gracefully, feeling a sense of pride and relief. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her heart was steady and full. She had faced the fear, the doubt, and the judgment, and she had emerged victorious. She had communicated through her music in a way that words could not. In that moment, she was no longer the quiet girl in the background. She was a musician, a storyteller, a person who had shared her soul with the world and had been heard, understood, and appreciated. The room erupted with applause, cheers, and admiration, and she knew that this moment would stay with her and with everyone, would listen forever. The applause washed over her like a wave. It was loud, genuine, and persistent. She stood for a moment bowing, her heart pounding, but this time not with fear. It was with a strange mixture of relief, pride, and wonder. She had done it. She had faced the laughter, the doubt, and the whispering, and she had turned it into something beautiful. Every note she had played had spoken for her, and now the people who had doubted her were the ones who were amazed. She could see it in their faces, the surprise, the admiration, and a little bit of shame for having underestimated her. It was a quiet victory, one that didn't need words, one that no one could take away. After she stepped away from the piano, she felt lighter than she had in years. The nervous tension that had gripped her since stepping on stage was gone. It had been replaced by a calm confidence she had never experienced before. She realized that this performance was more than just playing music. It had been about proving something to herself. She had always doubted whether she could face a room full of people, a room full of judgment, and still express herself fully. Now she knew she could. She had the courage, the skill, and the heart to do it. The audience began to cheer even more enthusiastically. Students clapped, some on their feet, some whispering words of encouragement to each other. Teachers smiled, exchanging quiet looks of pride. Parents looked at her with admiration and warmth. She walked to the edge of the stage, acknowledging the applause with a small, humble wave. Her smile was quiet but full of satisfaction. She felt a sense of belonging in that moment, as if she had been recognized not just for her talent, but for the person she truly was. She had let the world see her passion, her dedication, and her spirit. And it had been received openly, honestly, and warmly. Backstage, she was met with congratulations. Fellow performers, teachers, and even some of the students who had laughed before came forward. Their words were sincere, and she felt a warm glow from their recognition. She smiled, feeling a connection with people she had once thought she could never reach. It was not just about applause or recognition. It was about communication, understanding, and respect. She had shared a piece of herself that had been hidden for so long, and now it was out in the world, acknowledged and appreciated. That realization filled her with a deep sense of accomplishment. Walking off the stage, she felt the rush of adrenaline fade slowly, replaced by reflection. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the late nights alone with her piano, the struggles with difficult pieces, the moments of doubt, and the small victories that had led to mastery. Every mistake had taught her patience, every repetition had built her skill, and every late-night practice had strengthened her resolve. All of it had been necessary to create the performance she had just given. She felt grateful for every moment, even the challenging ones, because they had made this moment possible. In the days following the performance, people's reactions stayed with her. Students who had once ignored her now approached her with admiration. They asked her about her music, how she had learned to play, and how she had managed to perform so confidently. Teachers praised her not just for technical skill, but for the emotional depth she had shown. Parents complimented her dedication and composure. She realized that her performance had changed more than just the audience's perception of her talent. It had shifted the way people saw her as a person. She was no longer invisible. She had a voice, and she had used it powerfully. She also noticed a change within herself. The fear of being judged, of being laughed at, that had haunted her for so long, now seemed smaller. It did not vanish completely, but it no longer had control over her actions. She knew she could face challenges and still remain true to herself. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. She had discovered the strength that came from preparation, practice, and belief in her own abilities. This realization gave her a newfound confidence, one that would stay with her for years to come. Music became an even deeper part of her life after that day. She continued to practice, to explore new pieces, and to push her abilities further. But now she did it with the knowledge that her effort mattered, that her dedication could be recognized, and that she had the power to touch others through her art. Each note she played carried the memory of that performance. The moment when she overcame fear and doubt, and the audience recognized the story she had to tell. It was a reminder of what she could achieve when she committed fully. Without holding back, she also learned about humility and grace. Despite the applause and recognition, she remained grounded. She understood that her success was not about proving anyone wrong, but about expressing herself fully. She had been laughed at, underestimated, and doubted, but her performance had not been an act of revenge. It was an act of honesty, courage, and authenticity. The audience's reaction was gratifying, but the real victory was internal. She had faced fear and come through it, and that strength would remain with her. Over time, she inspired others without even trying. Younger students, especially those who were shy or reserved, began to approach her, asking for advice and encouragement. They wanted to know how she had gained the confidence to perform in front of so many people. She shared her story openly, emphasizing practice, patience, and self-belief. She explained that it was okay to be nervous, that mistakes were part of learning, and that courage was built step by step. Through her experience, she became a quiet mentor, showing others that talent and effort could overcome doubt and fear. Looking back, she realized that the moment she first touched the piano on that stage had been transformative. It had not only proven her skill, but it had also revealed her inner strength. She had learned that being true to oneself, committing fully, and expressing one's passion could break through even the harshest doubt. That day marked a turning point in her life. She no longer feared judgment in the same way, and she no longer questioned her own abilities. She had discovered something far more valuable than recognition. She had discovered her own resilience, her own voice, and the power of sharing her heart through music. Years later, she would remember that first performance with vivid clarity. The nervous steps onto the stage, the quiet determination in her hands, the initial doubt and laughter in the audience, and the way the music had transformed the room. She would remember the silence that followed her last note, the eruption of applause, and the faces of people who had finally seen her for who she was. It was a memory that would always remind her of what she was capable of the courage she had found, and of the beauty that could be created when one dared to step forward and share their passion fully. Her story became a quiet legend in her community, a reminder to those who doubted themselves that dedication, courage, and honesty could achieve remarkable things. And for her, it remained a personal triumph, a moment when she had been brave, authentic, and fully alive. The laughter of the past no longer mattered. What mattered was the music she had played, the hearts she had touched, and the confidence she had discovered within herself. That first note had been just the beginning, but it had changed everything.